From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
The September jobs report smashes all expectations, adding pressure to the Fed to keep a foot on the gas. We'll speak with the chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, Bernstein.
After an historic week in the House of Representatives, the focus turns to who will be the next speaker and how that will be decided, as endorsements for both Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise pour in.
And former chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, Kevin Brady, will be with us to share his thoughts on the race and talk about the state of the Republican Party. Joe, thank God it's Friday.
Yes, we'll start there.
It has been quite a week, and we're buckling up for one that could be even more dramatic next week, if you can believe that.
It probably will be, actually. The question is, will we know who the Speaker of the House is a week from today? I'm not sure that's true. How about Kevin Brady coming to talk to us, by the way? I'm guessing that he's glad to not be in the middle of all of this.
Yeah.
As so many lawmakers are, and keeping us guessing on a lot of things, Kaylee. They're talking about whether to have a televised debate right now in this speaker's race. Donald Trump has dropped an endorsement. It's been pretty noisy the last 24 hours.
It has, and I would imagine it's going to stay so. As you say, what we want is clarity, and frankly, I'm not sure how quickly we are going to get that.
No, that's true, even though we will try this hour. I'll tell you what, though, it's been a week. If you've been with us on Balance of Power, you know all about it. We've been in touch with many lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to look back on the week that was.
I'll survive. You know, this is personal with Matt.
I don't want to be Speaker. I want Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker.
Resolved that the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives is hereby declared to be vacant.
I'm going to be extraordinarily proud of the person I fought for, the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy.
Chaos is Speaker McCarthy.
We need a Speaker. Ideally, somebody who doesn't want to be Speaker and hasn't pursued that at all costs for his entire adult life.
The office of Speaker of the House of the United States House of Representatives is hereby declared vacant.
The chair declares the House in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
I wonder if he symbolized the way you felt.
The only thing that I would have done differently is flung it in the direction of one person. Oh, yeah, I would have hit him square between the eyes.
Unfortunately, 4% of our conference can join all the Democrats and dictate who can be the Republican Speaker in this House. I will not run for Speaker again. I'll have the conference pick somebody else.
I know it's been a busy 24 hours on the other side of Pennsylvania. I wanted to note at the top that we continue to see the election of a Speaker as an internal matter of the House of Representatives.
A lot of people have been calling me about Speaker. All I can say is we'll do whatever's best for the country and for the Republican Party.
I hope whoever the next Speaker is gets rid of the motion to vacate.
Let me say this to the next Speaker of the House, whomever that may be. Think carefully about what happened to your predecessors before trying to coddle the hard right.
And we saw there the men who are really seen as the leaders in this race now, Republicans Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise. Let's break all of this down with our Bloomberg reporter panel, Megan Scully, who leads our congressional coverage, as well as Jonathan Tamari. So, Megan, just to begin with you, that's the week that was. Brace
I'm exhausted, thanks.
For the week that is to come. I mean, realistically, what are we going to see?
Well, if nothing else has been made clear in the past week or two, as my crystal ball is completely broken, but I will tell you what I expect to happen and then take it for what it is. So there was talk earlier today of a potential televised debate on Monday. Then that seems to have been scuttled completely. None of the candidates want to participate. They want to resolve this internally, which is probably the best thing for Republicans, right? Instead of having sort of a grudge match aired on national TV to do this privately. The American people aren't voting for Speaker after all. It's members of the House. So then Tuesday, we're expecting to have sort of an internal Republican meeting, closed door, where supposedly they're going to come up with a Speaker candidate. I'm not terribly optimistic that that's going to happen on Tuesday. Wednesday is supposed to be the day or the first day of votes. Remember, it took several days and 15 rounds of voting to get Kevin McCarthy elected Speaker. So it could be a very rocky week where there may or may not be a vote on the floor on Wednesday, and it's likely going to spill into the weekend and beyond.
Well, let's hear from the president, who spoke today about the jobs report. We're going to get to jobs, but he was, of course, asked about this. Didn't know if he'd take a swing at an answer. President Biden on how he might work with a future Republican speaker. Here's what he said.
Whomever the House Speaker is, I'm going to try to work with. They control half the Congress, and I'm going to try to work with them. There's some people I imagine it's going to be easier to work with than others, but whoever the Speaker is, I'll try to work with.
Some easier to work with than others. Jonathan, I'm assuming he sees a Steve Scalise easier to work with, and Jim Jordan, now endorsed by Donald Trump, the opposite. Is that how we're supposed to read that?
I think, relatively speaking, yes, Scalise would probably be easier to work with than Jim Jordan, who has been pretty much leading the impeachment push against President Biden and who is one of the closest allies of Trump in the House. But I think whoever emerges from this is going to be more difficult to work with than Kevin McCarthy. If you've watched the Republican conference over the last decade plus, they've only moved in one direction. They've moved more conservative on policy. They've been more aggressive on tactics, more disruptive. Trump's influence is continuing to push in that direction. Either Scalise or Jordan is going to be more conservative than McCarthy, and I think we're looking at kind of more difficult times ahead when it comes to the Republican House, Democratic Senate, and the White House, no matter who wins this race.
I was really struck, Jonathan, in the last 24 hours by a letter that 45 Republican members of Congress wrote about the motion to vacate. They essentially said they were embarrassed by what has happened this past week and that they don't want these same 8 individuals who had the power to oust Kevin McCarthy to have the power to dictate essentially how the House is governed going forward. Is the motion to vacate likely to go away? As we're talking about who could be the next speaker, they could be kicked out of the job just as easily, theoretically, if the rules stay as they are.
That's right. And there's a lot of momentum, as you mentioned, for changing this. A lot of Republicans don't like the way this happened. They don't like the fact that their own power has basically been stripped for the time being. The challenge is that we've seen the entire time. Republicans have a very slim majority. To change the rules of the House, you need a majority vote. So a small faction of Republicans who oppose the change could block this change still unless some Democrats agree to go along with it. There is some hint that some Democrats might go along with it in the name of good governance, in the idea that the House should not be allowed to just grind to a halt like this. But it probably will take some Democrats going along with it because the hard right people, they like what they just did, and they're not going to want to give that power up.
We have to talk about the Trump factor here. Byron Donalds was on around this time yesterday talking about how Donald Trump might be here Tuesday to address the caucus. That was before we knew he would make an endorsement, though. Was it a choice between one of those two? Either come here and get involved, put your name on the line, or endorse from afar. Is he actually going to be part of this process?
We have not heard today, and it's Donald Trump, so he may be making a last-minute decision here. We do know that he has some events at Mar-a-Lago, I believe, on Wednesday, so Tuesday would be the day that he would come to D.C. should he come here.
The optics behind this would be remarkable, and his first visit back to Capitol Hill since January 6th, the day he wanted to go up to the Hill.
Absolutely, yes. And remember, he never made it to the Hill on January 6th. And so this would be a matter of him coming up and presumably throwing his weight behind Jim Jordan. That could actually backfire, though, for Jordan, because Trump does not play well in a lot of these moderate districts in the Hudson Valley, districts in Southern California, that Biden actually carried in 2020. So Trump coming up and endorsing the man who is leading the impeachment inquiry against the president that they voted for makes it even harder for folks like Mike Lawler and Mark Molinaro.
And Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, was essentially calling out those very same moderate Republicans you're referring to. He tweeted, or X posted, I should say, will the so-called moderate Republicans from New York sheepishly do the same, talking about Trump endorsing an extreme candidate. Just quickly here, because we all have been captivated by what's happened on Capitol Hill in the last week, I also have to note that we had a pretty explosive jobs report today, 336,000 added in the month of September. We saw President Biden, Jonathan, trying to flex that as Bidenomics in action. He's had a really hard time for getting credit in the good things in the economy. And I just wonder if he's still going to be owning Bidenomics to the same way if it ever turns south.
I mean, I think he doesn't have much choice now. He's put so much effort into it. He's put his own name on it. Like, other people didn't impose that Bidenomics term. His own White House staff has been pushing it. So I think he is going to own this economy for better or worse. And you do point out, even though there have been some really good economic numbers for some time now, people still have that memory of inflation, and it's really been hard for the White House to get people to shake that. That's still, I think, the dominant thing people think about when they think of the economy, and it's a major challenge for him going into his reelection bid, as all polling is showing right now.
Yeah.
Much to figure out and learn from our friends here in the Bureau. Many thanks. Megan Scully and Jonathan Tamari for getting us started on Balance of Power. Coming up, Jared Bernstein, the chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, weighs in on that jobs report that Kayleigh and Jonathan were just talking about. It's up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
I've been very nervous about the possibility of a soft landing, about inflation coming down. I remain nervous. We are not there yet. We've only had a couple months of data, but today's data fell for me on the positive side of the ledger.
An optimistic Jason Furman of the Harvard Kennedy School earlier today on Bloomberg Sound On. We talked it out on Bloomberg Radio, and now we talk it out with Jared Bernstein, the chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. He's with us from the White House lawn. Mr. Chairman, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining. As we take a look at this headline number, it blew the roof off, and everybody had an initial freak out this morning. But the other thing that Jason said, and he tweeted this, was he went from the stages of shock to nervousness to then relief as he realized this actually was pretty good news, seeing that wages did not spiral even as payrolls advanced far more than anybody expected. The thing is, you've been making the case, Jared, for stable, steady growth. When numbers blow the doors off like this, how is that possible?
Well, it's interesting to hear Jason's travel through the three stages of an upside jobs number. I think that's interesting, and very much share that. I mean, one of the things you have to do in a report like this is, of course, get under the hood. Jason's good at that. It's certainly one of the things we do at CEA. And I think you mentioned the wage story. I think there's still some cooling there. But also, even if you just look at the top line job numbers, I mean, you have to average over a few months to take out some of the bips and bops of the noisy high frequency data. 266,000 jobs per month over the past 3 months. Go back a year from now, that number was north of 400K. So any plot that you've seen today of, say, a 3-month rolling average of job gains is basically trending down. But what we want to see is some easing in the job market, but still strong enough to give consumers the buying power they need. And I think that's pretty much exactly what we got today.
Well, Jared, some easing is one thing. A sudden deterioration would be something else, and especially considering this data is backward looking at the month of September when student loan payments had not been resumed yet. We weren't yet over the child care cliff. The UAW strike only started halfway through the month, and we're still looking potentially in mid-November at the risk of a government shutdown. How concerned are you about that cocktail of headwinds that could be coming for this labor market and this economy more generally all at the same time?
Every economy has headwinds and tailwinds. We have very strong tailwinds that we just talked about in my first set of remarks, and I'm sure you've been talking about all day when it comes to the jobs report. I mean, look, we have a 70% consumer spending economy, and we have an unemployment rate that's been below 4% for 20 months in a row, and we're still generating gangbuster job numbers. That is a very strong tailwind. Now, against that, you have to take the headwinds as they come. This has been an extremely resilient economy, and it has batted off headwinds much stronger than the ones you just took us through. I mean, look, student debt restart, that is absolutely a challenge for families who are facing that restart. But I think if you look at it at the macro level, our calculation is that that's something to the tune of around $4 billion a month, or $48 billion a year. That is a very tiny share of $18 trillion of consumer spending over the year. So you have to look at these things in context. You have to consider a $26 trillion economy. You talk about a few strikes, no question about it. We're actually glad to see labor flexing its muscle, but if you tot up all those workers, they're less than 0.1% of the labor force. So I think we have to keep in mind the general aggregates in which we're talking about here.
I don't know if you count the UAW strike as one of those strikes, Jared, but we've got analysis coming out of Bloomberg Economics today that says if this became a full-bore labor action, it could mean as many as 700,000 job losses, 5 jobs lost for each striking worker, as we try to get to the ancillary impact of this job market. What are you modeling at the White House? Because we keep hearing next month's jobs report will look a lot different than this one.
Well, first of all, it is the case that any of the strikers from the UAW were not included in the September report because of when that survey gets fielded. However, thus far, that strike has been somewhat surgical. As we know, there's 150,000 UAW workers, and I think the number on strike is somewhere between 20, maybe 25 and 30 thus far. So we'll have to see that as it unfolds. Look, there's no question that a longer and deeper strike has greater economic implications. But look, I think we have to take this as it comes. I don't really, that 700,000 number sounds awfully inflated to me, and I don't think that we should overblow the headwinds that are out there just because, if it bleeds, it leads. I think we have to have a clear-eyed, open, just a clear-eyed, open-minded look at this headwind-tailwind trade-off. And as I've mentioned, I think the strength of the tailwinds have surpassed those of the headwinds. Now, look, I'm an economist at the White House. You might say that's motivated reasoning. I would point you towards the data. I would point you towards the jobs data. I'd point you towards today's jobs data. I would point you towards Q3 expectations for GDP. I mean, it's kind of like what Jason was saying earlier. I mean, he's looking, and I think as any responsible economist should, for reasons to worry, and I do that too. And he's just having he's finding himself having to get to yes. And I think that's a reasonable place to be.
Jared, obviously, as you at the White House are looking at headwinds and tailwinds, the Federal Reserve is doing the same. And I know you will not comment directly on Federal Reserve policy. They operate independently from the White House and the administration. That is understood. The bond market, though, is reacting to what it thinks this Federal Reserve is going to do. And we have seen some pretty dramatic moves, the cost of borrowing moving substantially higher. What do you think the appropriate response to that is? Do you assess the bond market moves as maybe being accurate in terms of for how long rates will stay high?
Well, I think it's just, that really fits into the headwind discussion. I've been focusing on real rates, which of course have gone from something, if you look at the 10-year real rate, that's gone from -1 to a little bit north of +2. And you've seen the impact that has on mortgage rates as well, which is in the mid-7s. And look, that's going to obviously put a damper on interest rate sensitive parts of the economy. And that's just part of the world we live in. And the Fed has very much a job to do, and they've been doing it. I'm not going to comment on that, as you said. But I consider that to be one on the list, and what you have to do is tick through the implications of that. Is it dampening labor demand? Well, certainly not in the September report. Now, as you say, so, here we are in October, that's September, so you can call it backward looking, and I wouldn't disagree with you. But I think that if we've learned anything, it's that it's extremely challenging to look around a corner right now. So I think we have to look at the numbers that we know, the ones that are in hand, and I think they're quite consistent with the story I've been telling you today, which is tailwinds over headwinds. I also think that the consumer story is one with some momentum. So there I will look around a corner a bit. I think if you've been sustaining an unemployment rate this low for this long, you're starting to see wages beat prices. That's been the case in the past few months. I think that's a positive forward-looking indicator.
All right, Jared Bernstein, chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Thank you for running through all these tailwinds and headwinds with us this evening. We appreciate your time. Now, coming up, we're going to continue the conversation on this blowout U.S. jobs number, plus what it means potentially for the Federal Reserve. That's still ahead. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
I wish I were here to announce a tentative agreement in one or more of these companies, but I do want to be really clear. We are making significant progress. In just 3 weeks, we have moved these companies further than anyone thought was possible.
United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain speaking earlier today as the union gives Ford, GM, and Stellantis a break from new walkouts this week. Joining us now to discuss is Stuart Paul of Bloomberg Economics. You may have just heard us referencing Stuart and the team's research with Jared Bernstein. Stuart, thank you very much for being here. He thinks your numbers, which essentially say that if this strike were to expand to all 150,000 members of the union, it would mean the loss of more than 700,000 jobs. He called that potentially overinflated. Rules of debate say you get to respond. What is your response? Walk us through your logic.
No, thank you for giving me the opportunity to respond. So those knock-on effects do take time. It's not the sort of thing that happens immediately. But if you were to go to the Bureau of Economic Analysis's own internal systems for examining the total amount of labor from every industry across the United States economy, and think about all the ancillary services that are provided downstream and upstream for auto production, it turns out that there is about a 5x amplification of people going on strike. So think about the upstream parts providers that have to stall their production lines when UAW workers go on strike. Think about the different raw materials processors that have to then slow their rolls as demand starts to slow down by parts producers and by auto producers. And then think about all the ancillary business services. So we do find that the knock-on effect is about 5x. That is in line with what we saw in 1998. And so I refer Jared just to the Bureau of Economic Analysis's own internal systems.
Would it be 5x no matter the number of workers? For instance, we got an update from Shawn Fain today. It appears they're not escalating anything this weekend. Based on the numbers of workers on strike now, is it still the same equation?
It's that it depends on how long the strike lasts. Those knock-on effects take time. So the 5x amplification is typically after about 6 to 7 weeks of staying on strike. It is nice to hear that there is some progress being made. That said, if these UAW workers stay on strike for another week, we will be approaching that 4-week mark when the knock-on effects really start to accelerate, and it will have an effect on the October jobs report. If those workers stay off if those UAW workers stay off producer payrolls through the survey window that includes the 12th of the month, just 6 days away.
I'll tell you what, Stuart, thank you. Stuart Paul in New York. We appreciate the research here. It's been a guidepost for us today, Kaylee. And
it has indeed.
When you suggest, when you take a look at some of the other labor actions that we've been talking about, it could have a real interruption this week. All right, coming up, we'll get perspective on the state of the Republican Party from former Texas Republican Congressman Kevin Brady. It's next on Bloomberg.
This is extremely unfortunate that we're here. 8 Republicans teamed up with all of the Democrats that were in attendance to remove a Republican speaker.
My mission is to ensure that the House of Representatives runs better, because the way we've been running Washington, D.C. for the last 30 years has led us to a point where no one is really responsible for the spending.
I do think it's time that we do have a sea change with respect to leadership in the Republican Party on Capitol Hill.
We have a House Republican majority elected by the American people to serve as a check and balance on Joe Biden, to rein in reckless, wasteful spending, and to fight to secure our border. And all of that work, all of that important work has now been upended by these 8 selfish people.
It's hard to gauge where things will go at this moment. There have been a lot of phone calls made today. A lot of, every member's talking to every member right now, trying to figure out what the best best path forward is.
If the House of Representatives goes from the stewardship of Kevin McCarthy to either the stewardship of Jim Jordan or Steve Scalise, that's going to come to the delight of many conservatives.
The real question is who can unite us? Who can bring us all together so we can move forward and recognize that we should be arguing with the Democrats over policy, not each other.
Representatives Nicole Malliotakis, Byron Donalds, Mike Lawler, and Matt Gaetz all joining Balance of Power this historic week. For perspective now on the state of the Republican conference, let's bring in former Congressman Kevin Brady of Texas, who held office for more than 2 decades and chaired the Ways and Means Committee. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for being with us this evening. We would love your reaction to the events of this week. Did it make you happy to no longer be in the chamber?
Oh, no, it was one. Thanks for having me on. It's good to see you both. It was painful to watch, mainly because I think there are an awful lot of good people in the Republican conference. And while they appeared very divided, that day, in truth, on most of the issues, the agenda for the Republican House, which I think is an excellent one, there is an awful lot of unity there. I think what we often see, especially in tight majorities, yes, you have to work hard to find consensus on your agenda items, but strategy often seems to be that dividing point. People have different views of how you achieve your agenda, how you make this change. And so for me, it was tough. It was tough to watch that in real time. And I obviously very damaging in the short run. Does it have to be in the long run? I don't think so.
Congressman, here's what you said to the Woodlands Economic Conference on your way out here in 2021. I'm sure you remember these words, but let's bring our viewers in and we'll talk about it.
I'm retiring as your congressman. This term, my 13th, will be my last. I've noticed that anytime you retire from Washington, D.C., and I've still got my term to fill out, but any time that happens, some are really eager to assign a motive. So let me tackle those. Is this because I've lost faith in a partisan Congress and the political system? Absolutely not. After 25 years in the nation's capital, I haven't yet seen a problem we can't solve or move past. Not one. Especially when we put our ideas and our best intentions together.
That was a very optimistic view, Congressman. I wonder if you still feel that way and if there's anyone in the House right now who represents that view.
I do feel that way. And the truth of the matter is that, and I always wish I could introduce America to these people, but there's a middle class, Joe, in Congress like there is in the real world. These are on both sides of the aisle. These are people who are very responsible, serious lawmakers, working very hard to represent their district and find solutions for America. You don't, see them all the time because they don't do outrageous things. They don't say outrageous things. They're just very serious, and they do try. Look, they may be very conservative, as I am, may be very liberal, perhaps as a Richard Neal, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, who we work together on so many issues. But there is common ground to be found. And so I am optimistic. And all those big issues we often read about, there are usually not just one, but 2 or 3, I think, very good solutions if we can find the will to do it.
Well, right now, what the Republican conference is going to have to find the will to do is coalesce around one new speaker. How hard is that job right now? What is going on the inside as we speak, do you think?
Yeah, it is a difficult job, no question. And the thinner the margin, the tougher it is. This happened when my second term, I think in 1999, we had a 6-vote margin, Republicans in the House. Depending on natural disasters or funerals at home, there are some days you didn't even have a majority of votes in the U.S. House. But that was a different time from the standpoint that it was seen as pulling together to advance your agenda was rewarded and part of your responsibility. Things have changed in that regard. But here, I guess, is my point. I think unifying around agenda is key. Here's what's happening right now as you and I are visiting. So those speaker candidates are living on the phone, connecting with members, laying out their agenda, seeking their support. They're coordinating and building that support. with members who are also living on their phones, but they're also coordinating outside support, influencers, obviously doing media and laying out their platform. Extremely intense for the candidates, but it is for the members as well. Some of them are avoiding being on their phone if possible, especially if they're undecided. Others are deeply engaged in this. And at the end of the day, most people assume nothing but political considerations. And there are big ones because the stakes are high for you as a member of Congress, for your district, for your bills and what you hope to achieve. They're extremely high. But the personal considerations are significant as well. The relationships you've built with those candidates on your committee, on bills that you've worked together on. It could be in state delegations or causes. You may have worked together on a childhood cancer caucus or rural hospital help, or traveled together on key parts of the world that you're both engaged in. Those personal relationships in these leadership races are critically important as well. And I think that's what it sometimes is hard for the public to see.
Perfect description of how Washington really works, Congressman. There are, of course, now two real candidates running here, Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan, both of whom you worked with. Donald Trump has even weighed in, endorsing Jim Jordan. We heard last evening from another former colleague of yours, though, Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who warned about the dangers of a potential Speaker Jim Jordan. Here's what she said.
Jim Jordan knew more about what Donald Trump had planned for January 6th than any other member of the House of Representatives. Jim Jordan was involved, was part of the conspiracy in which Donald Trump was engaged as he attempted to overturn the election.
This is, of course, from someone who served on the January 6th committee and paid a political price for that, Congressman. Based on what you just heard there, is that the wrong direction for the Republican conference?
Well, I'll just tell you this. I think this should be decided by those House Republicans currently in office. And those of us who had the privilege to serve and to lead in some of these areas, I think we serve our country best by allowing, not interfering in these discussions, allowing them to have these full-throated conversations about how they unify and who's the best to do that. And that's the tack that I take.
Ever diplomatic, the former congressman from Texas, Kevin Brady. It's great to see you again, Congressman. It's been too long. I hope we see you again in the nation's capital.
Yes, sir. Good to see you, Joe.
Coming up,
Kaylee.
Our closers. It is Friday, after all. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are back with us today as we take a closer look at the contest for Speaker through the eyes of our political panel. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
Our members want to see somebody in the Republican conference have 217 votes before we take this vote to the floor. I think considering everything that's happened on Capitol Hill the last week, that is the prudent step to take, that our nominee for Speaker has to have the full support of the Republican conference, not just a majority of the support of the Republican conference.
So the revolution will not be televised? That was Florida Congressman Byron Donalds with us around this time yesterday. For more, we assembled our political panel. Rick Davis is here, partner, of course, at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. They are our Bloomberg politics contributors. So what do you think here, Rick? If that's the case, if they're not going to bring this to the floor until they've coalesced around a candidate, we're here 1 week from tonight having the same conversation, right?
Yeah, that'd be my bet. I mean, first of all, I love the theater of the 15 ballots that Kevin McCarthy took on the floor, watching C-SPAN all night long. I think that was really good and a healthy thing for our country to see, like, how the sausage is made to pick a speaker. Now they're going to do it behind closed doors in a Republican caucus, no Democrats around to pick on the dysfunction. And I really wonder if it's actually going to be worse, not better. But I can't imagine if they're going to try to get to 218, how they get to 218 in any short period of time behind closed doors. It's just going to be very hard.
Well, especially if you look at the list of endorsements for either Jim Jordan or Steve Scalise, it's not totally evenly split. I think more people actually at this point have come out for Jim Jordan, but there's enough of a split that it becomes abundantly clear that they are catering to two very different branches within the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. And it's a question of which one, Jeannie, is ultimately going to be able to attract enough from the other side. Is it going to take someone like a Kevin Hern to actually get that done? Can either of the two of them do it realistically?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we know the answer to that, but I agree with you completely. I mean, this is shaping up to be a battle about who controls the Republican Party. Is it going to be this MAGA wing, or is it going to be a more establishment wing? And you can just hear it in the way Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise are marketing and selling themselves. Steve Scalise is saying, look, I raised money for you. I fundraised for you. I've gotten you elected. Right? That's a more traditional way in which we think about governing and working across, across at least within the party and reaching across the aisle. And then you have Jim Jordan, who has no experience in leadership, has not had a strong legislative record. He is a bomb thrower, and he is strongly endorsed by Donald Trump and received a Medal of Freedom days after January 6th. By a president who was under an impeachment inquiry and now has been indicted for those events. So these are the choices that the Republicans are faced with. And somebody has to get to 218, but I'm not sure when they do, if it's going to be any easier to govern this caucus.
All right. January 6th, you mentioned it. I have to ask about this because we heard from Liz Cheney earlier, and her remarks were pretty effective, I thought, last night. Rick, you heard her speech. She said Jim Jordan is the closest thing we have in the House to the conspiracy on January 6th. He was also just endorsed by Donald Trump. Aren't both of those advantage Scalise?
Yeah, they should be disqualifying, right? I mean, if you were talking about leading the House of Representatives and you were the inside guy on the January 6th conspiracy to rob the country of its, free vote to elect a president, that should be disqualifying. But we've learned that these days nothing, I guess, is disqualifying anymore. It's baggage he will carry into this election. And by the way, don't assume these are the only two candidates who are going to get votes in this race, right? I mean, if they could go to 4, 5, 6 ballots, and then all of a sudden someone says, well, look, we're tired of this. We're going to nominate someone else like Kevin or one of these characters, including, by the way, Patrick McHenry, who is serving as the Speaker pro tem. So I think this is going to be a very long, evolved kind of contest, especially if they have it behind closed doors. They'll air out their grievances. And I think that actually is not good for Jordan because there are a lot of people who have a bone to pick with him, especially from the dominant group of Republican House members, and that would be the establishment wing.
Right, and a lot of those moderate Republicans as well who are in districts that
Can
Biden
we call them
won.
Establishment Republicans? Because there aren't any moderate Republicans in the House of Representatives.
Wow, from Rick Davis.
Fair enough. Well, okay, so we were just talking about former President Trump and his thumb maybe being on the scale in this in some way. We also have a question as to whether or not he's actually going to show up at the Capitol next week, just like we have a question as to whether or not there will be a televised debate with Brett Baier moderating between these speaker candidates. Rick, I've been hearing all day, or waiting all day to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think they've canned the debate. So unless it's back on, it's interesting because I think both Scalise and Jordan have said they're not going to do a debate unless they've had a chance to bring their pitches to the caucus first, right? They owe it to the caucus to make their pitch to them. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not that shakes out. But look, I mean, Donald Trump can't not go where the action is, right? I mean, and so I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't try to make some kind of a appearance, create some disruption, especially if the Jordan people are saying, hey, look, we're having trouble with some of these guys. Put them in a room with Donald Trump, and it's going to be very hard to say no. So it might be quite a tactic for the Jordan team.
High drama. Speaking of Steve Scalise, he was on Fox earlier today talking about the need to get things back on track in the House. Here's what he said.
At the end of the day, it's a lot of one-on-one conversations over the last few days I've been having with my colleagues and a lot of introspection about how we get things back on track. The problems that we have internally, they don't go away with the new speaker, but the real question the members have is how do we get things back on track?
Jeannie, the president, Joe Biden, spoke today about I'll work with whomever becomes the next speaker. He's hoping, if it's one of these two, that's Steve Scalise?
It's hard to say. Steve Scalise himself is a very conservative guy, but he's absolutely right. They need to get things on track. So it's hard to say who the president is hoping for. From the perspective of the campaign, this chaos does help the Biden campaign. But from the perspective of governing and policy in Ukraine, he does want somebody more like Steve Scalise, who is more establishment, more traditional, moderately said. But can we also say how weirdly bizarre Donald Trump's endorsement of Jim Jordan was?
He's a big wrestling
fan. The focus on the wrestling. I mean, this is like, the plane is going down. Let me get somebody who's not a pilot. You're a good swimmer, so let's get you piloting this plane. I mean, can we just talk about where we are today and the insanity of all of this? His endorsement was about wrestling. He's not a wrestling coach. Yeah. He would be a Speaker of the House.
That's true.
But this is where Donald Trump has brought us. It is crazy times in D.C.
He mentioned in a speech today as well, he would never wrestle him because Jim Jordan would win. So he is, this is a big thing for him. Maybe Vince McMahon could be Speaker. That's something we haven't talked about.
Okay, so we can talk about the attributes of different sports and how they translate into skill with a gavel.
Sure.
But what we just heard from Steve Scalise there, the idea of getting things back on track, and he said a new speaker is not going to be able to fix everything in the House right now, especially, Jeannie, I would think, if the motion to vacate being able to be brought by one individual still stands, whoever becomes new speaker, isn't he going to be just as beholden to a handful of individuals as Kevin McCarthy was?
1,000%, because this is not about the individuals in that position. It is about these rules which need to be changed. The number one rule is, as you mentioned, the motion to vacate. But there are others as well. This caucus has got to allow its members, because they only control 1/3 of the federal government, to work across the aisle without retribution to get anything done. And we all know November 17th coming fast. They're going to have to do a CR, and at this point, we don't know if there's going to be a speaker in place to do it. And if things don't change, that's who's ever in that position is going to have to work across the aisle even to get a CR done. So they've got to change those rules.
Yeah, it's just a matter of when we're actually going to be able to get down to any kind of normal legislative business, because we aren't really sure what Patrick McHenry as pro temp is able to preside over. We have much more to discuss, though that was kind of a marathon, just like this week has been. We're going to talk about former President Trump next. What his greatest fear is. Our political panel sticks with us. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
He does have a very potent fear of being poisoned.
Did not know he had a fear of being poisoned.
Well, now you do.
Uh-huh.
So he uses and prefers this small Heinz glass ketchup bottle because he likes to hear his valet, whoever is serving him his meal, he likes to hear the pop when you...
Really? That's why?
Yeah.
I thought it was because his hands are so little, it seemed like a real ketchup bottle.
He likes to hear the pop. That was former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson on Jimmy Kimmel Live earlier this week. For more, let's welcome back our political panel. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. Yeah, right? Unopened.
Right.
Pop. Jeannie, valid fear?
It actually is historically a valid fear. So this is one thing I will defend Donald Trump on. But I want to tell you, historically, what do leaders do? You have a taster in there.
Yeah, how about that?
So you don't need to have the pop of the bottle. You have a taster. So, he didn't like Mike Pence, apparently. Maybe he could have just had Mike Pence taste it, and we'd all be okay.
This was an answer to a question about him throwing food at the wall, as we read, learned from the January 6th committee and the ketchup dripping down the wall and the whole thing. But, I mean, I know this is comical to folks, Rick, but is this not a real fear for such a controversial figure as Donald Trump?
Well, I think, as Jeannie said, I think there's not a head of state in the world who doesn't fear being poisoned or assassinated. I mean, it's a rough world.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who, are a little bit crazy out there. So, sure, yeah. But like, as Jeannie said, I mean, the Secret Service takes precautions. I mean,
there is a Secret Service.
Yeah, there's a Secret Service. And I guess maybe he doesn't trust the Secret Service, which
that might be
maybe a decent concern.
Might be getting warmer.
I don't know.
It all comes down to trust issues, perhaps.
That's right.
We have less than a minute left. Jeannie, biggest fear?
My biggest fear is small, contained areas, I have to say.
Claustrophobia.
Claustrophobia, yeah.
Okay.
Rick Davis, biggest fear?
I have no fear.
That's the best answer and what I would have expected.
That's not what you said in the commercial break.
I learned about yours on the radio this week.
Buried alive.
Being buried alive.
That's what I mean, in a small container.
So claustrophobia here. Remember we talked about the sub when the sub implosion happened?
Yes.
This is all kind of the same thing.
connected.
So I've told Kaylee to make sure she watches Kill Bill this weekend.
But what was Joe Matthews' big fear?
I don't think I never.
The
did I
guys
have one?
won't fess up to fears.
Did I have one? No, I'll come up with something for you. Claustrophobia. That's it. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. Thank you. It's getting tight in here. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
Thank you so much for joining us on Balance of Power. It's been a week. Buckle up for the next one. We'll see you then. This is Bloomberg.